We need tons of play in our lives. For God's sake, if you can't live a purposeful and playful life, what is the point?
Stand by, I'll be right there.
Hello and welcome to Minter Dialogue, episode number 373. Today is Sunday the 17th of May 2020. My name is Minter Dial and I'm your host for this podcast. This week's interview is with Holly Woods. Holly is a coach and consultant who works with visionary entrepreneurs and innovators who use their business as a vehicle to change the world. With a PhD in human and organizational development, Holly's a purpose activator who helps her clients to create products that can have more meaning and impact. Holly just published her book, The Golden Thread, Where to Find Purpose in the Stages of Your Life. And in this conversation, we discuss with Holly a whole range of topics around finding one's purpose and golden thread, including how to find one's purpose, the connection between passion and purpose, how to avoid the tyranny of purpose, a great conversation that I hope will resonate with you. You'll find all the show notes on minterdial.com. As ratings and reviews are the lifeblood of any podcast, please consider going over to this handy all-in-one ratethispodcast.com/MDIAL, MDial, to drop in your review, and don't forget to subscribe to catch all the next episodes. Now for the interview. Holly Woods. Well, if that ain't a name to be having. You and I met over a small exchange around purpose on LinkedIn. Thus began a wonderful journey for me. I got a chance to read your new book, The Golden Thread, and I wanted to have you on the show because you're all about purpose. So, Holly, in your words, how would you describe yourself?
Well, there are many ways I describe myself, but in this context, I am a purpose activator. I'm a soul speaker. I'm a business consultant. I work with people to try to find their deepest, truest sense of self, their purpose, to guide them in their work in the world. I believe that we each have a serious contribution to make as individual humans. We're each a thread in the tapestry of humanity. And so my deepest desire is to help all of us find our thread, our golden thread, and then make that contribution so the world will be a more beautiful place. So I work with mostly entrepreneurs and founders and innovators who are bringing important innovations into the world to take us to the next stage.
And you're based in California, correct?
I am, yes.
So you write in your book that no one is born knowing their purpose. It's not something in your DNA, if we can say. But what are the catalysts that make people want to figure it out? At least once you have the intention, it's a whole lot easier to think about it. But what is it that sort of makes someone wake up and say, I need to get this?
Well, there are some early indicators of purpose, as you've read. And so if we are encouraged and nourished in childhood, those curiosities and the inquisitiveness that we experience will take us there. So there are things that we are fascinated by in very early stages, toddlerhood. We find our way into what it is that speaks to us, but most of us don't have the environments or contexts to help us grow into a deeper awareness of that. So often we're repressed in some way in our childhood context, our families, et cetera, at school. And it takes a much greater impulse within us to come back to that which we're curious about and for which, really I would call our purpose. And that generally doesn't happen until somewhere in, early or late adulthood, as we enter a stage at which we can sense our internal thoughts and feelings and begin to see the world in a new way. So I call that the late subtle tier. And not to get too complex, but it's the stage at which we begin to experience the fullness of life, both our own internal experience and our external experience. We see the world around us, we see other people, and we start sensing who they are and sensing who we are, and we begin to imagine that we have something to contribute in that greater milieu. And that is when we begin to have this deep longing for purpose. And there are many earlier stages at which there are clues that our soul gives us about what it is would be, our greatest contribution, or what would make us happy or feel joy and feel inspired. But we ignore those because our culture really isn't oriented to help us look at those things deeply, at least at this point.
So there's this notion of meaning, meaningfulness, joy. Does everybody have a purpose? And therefore, does everybody have a shadow?
So having read parts of my book, I'm going to say yes. And these are my beliefs. And I have studied with the world's, sort of greatest experts in this. And I consider myself now among them, having done this for a few decades. And it's a pretty young field. That our soul brings us here to accomplish particular tasks. And on that journey, we read that I believe we get this amniotic amnesia, that we come in with a purpose, but our soul sets us up in this way to forget it in order for us to find our way back home again to ourselves. And so as we are on this journey, this path, this hero's journey, really, to find our purpose, to become ourselves again, we walk through life and face obstacles that are purposeful in order to overcome the shadow. So it's almost like you're walking toward the sun and behind you is the shadow. And purpose is like that. It has the side of the gift, and it has the side of that which we must overcome in order to be the gift. So each of us really does have both components. And the shadow is as nuanced as the gift of purpose. So when I'm working with people, literally, I'm pulling out of them the very nuanced expression of purpose that is the gift and the contribution, along with the very nuanced expression of the shadow that you came to resolve. So it's usually both of those things that I have to unearth in people in order to find, the essential multifaceted gem of our purpose.
And what I like is you're talking about this nuance, because when I wrote down my north at the very beginning, I must say, so my thread, if you will, I felt, it's going to be like everybody else's, and I was like, oh gosh, that sounds rather trite. And I felt a little bit embarrassed at some level. But of course, it's the nuance and the relationship you have with the words and the experiences that brought you into that, the amniotic amnesia that you have, that you sort of worked through to get to your texture. One of the things you talk about is purpose anxiety, and how it can be nerve-wracking. Do I really want to know me? Do I really want to uncover my shadow? Only the shadow knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men, a radio show from the 1920s and 30s. So is it always worth getting to your purpose if there's such an anxiety about my shadow?
So what most people don't recognize is it is actually the not knowing of our shadow, the not knowing of who we truly are. And that is the anxiety. So purpose anxiety is both, I want to know my gift so that I can feel the joyful expression of that and know that I'm making a contribution and having an impact. And it's also, the anxiety is also about, I'm afraid of knowing myself so truly that I have to unearth and excavate and reveal that which I most fear, which is myself in both ways, both the gift and the shadow. So when you say, is it worth it? What happens as we unearth the shadow, it becomes vivid, it becomes real, it becomes concrete, and then we can actually do something about it. The point of revealing your shadow is that it's no longer hidden. It becomes something I can confront and say, oh, maybe I'd actually like to evolve from that expression of me. Maybe I'd actually like to carve a little bit of the chunk of the the rawness off of that and be a little more present to who I am. And so as we come to know ourselves more, we can begin to evolve from that shadowed expression. So for instance, a facet of my purpose is to speak powerful truths. And I knew that from a really early age, and I had to confront some of the, my childhood trauma at 3 and 4. And I came to know myself as a truth speaker, but what I didn't know is that I was offending and doing destructive behaviors because my truth was often so raw and so aggressive because I had experienced so much trauma. And it wasn't until I saw the shadow of my truth speaking that was actually harming people. It was hurting my relationships, my personal relationships, my business relationships. And I'm like, oh, maybe there's a way I can be in my truth that doesn't harm others. So I had to really excavate that shadow about who I was and say, there's a different way. I want to be in the world that is more of a contribution. And if I can share that truth from a deep personal intimacy that experiences the compassion for myself and for the other, then I get to be in this reciprocal, give, receive relationship with someone where we get to share our truths about an experience. And I'm not flinging it at someone and hurting them. That took a couple of decades to hone that shadow, but I worked at it because I wanted to be present to myself and to the other in a way that was more loving and giving. So I give the truth now when it's welcome and when it can be received and when I can be in it without some vengeance or, some toxic expression.
Right. So you talk in the book about going from being to becoming as opposed to from being to doing. So I'm guessing that's sort of that notion, as I understand it, that you've come into this position of accepting the shadow. I talk in my new book about accepting your imperfections. And without going into psychology or anything like that, because that's not my zone, my bailiwick, let's say the politically correct terminology I use as being accepting your messiness or your naughtiness. Naughty is quite an acceptable term, but it can very quickly be a little bit more. And the challenge is accepting it when it really is a lot more. That is me. That's how evil I can go, or how dark I can go. So there's evil, dark, shadow, naughty, and it's a spectrum. And so sometimes you post-rationalize it as being just a little naughtiness or something else, and you realize it can be doing damage to other people or not, and you want to be accepting of it, but you want to be improving of it because you realize it's not so good. So it's going into that dark zone, understanding it, recognizing it, and yet not necessarily being satisfied with it, is what I'm hearing in what you said.
And on the other side of that, I think what most of us don't know until we experience it is that as we begin to dive into the shadow, the naughtiness, as you describe it, and unearth it, and I use the word excavate because sometimes it can feel like I'm excavating some part of me, or it can just be peeling back a little corner and peering in and then shutting it again. I saw something there. I'll turn to that later. As we do that, we become freer. We become more liberated and lighter. And from that place comes the joy and the happiness. Most of us, most people don't have this ever-present sense of joy or happiness. And we live in a heavy world. There's a lot for us to deal with and to cope with. And what I have experienced over the many decades of doing this work is that the more I pull back the covers and look inside and say, oh, there's something here for me. And I welcome that because it helps me to get rid of something or to clear something or to evolve some part of me that needs to be understood and I need to have compassion for, and I need to then integrate into me in a healthier way. I become lighter and more fulfilled and more joyful. And I'm able to then share that gift with the world, which is part of the expression of being purposeful, is that we get to share this magnificence of who we are. It was actually almost relegated to the shadow. So the shadow is always some expression of us that has another side. It's not something that we don't get to get rid of a part of ourselves. We actually get to integrate it in a new and different way. So we invite it in a healthier expression. So you've read in the book that I talk about these fractured subpsychic parts. And generally, that is the expression of shadow. They're parts of us that were relegated to the side or the corner in childhood because they weren't necessarily welcome in the context of our lives. And so we became shadowed as we pushed that part of ourselves out and away, not to be expressed anymore because it wasn't acceptable in our childhood context. And so when we speak to that part and say, hey, maybe I actually want you back in my life again. I want that creative part of you, that majestic part of me that wasn't welcome. And we get to sense what that is like newly in a new expression, in a new, more evolved expression as we grow up. We want that to be a part of our life. Then we become more whole. And that makes us more fulfilled.
So what I'm hearing is this notion of accepting the naughtiness. What I'm getting to is, I'm imagining as I listen to you, Holly, that you have this thing you're excavating. And for having done it for so many years, you're bringing a toothbrush in and you're cleaning stuff. And in this corner, is there any more shadow in here? And I kind of imagine you doing that. And yet now I'm hearing you bringing back some dirt, bringing back dirt into this because, whatever the thought is, it could be a naughty thought. Well, life without the naughty thought is actually not so much fun either. But so, you know what I mean? It's not, we're going to be priests, or priests certainly don't have it well, or Dalai Lama. Is that the true enlightenment, is when we have zero dirty thoughts? Or is it the ability for us to welcome into this other side, which is, let's call it an intimate thought, a non-perfect thought? Because like the mole on Marilyn Monroe's face, that is also us, and our imperfections are desirable. If we had a perfectly symmetrical face, we'd be butt ugly. In when I talk about empathy, where there's some crossovers, I talk about avoiding the tyranny of empathy. Is there such a thing as the tyranny of purpose?
That's a great question. I have actually asked that. I'll confess that my purpose has driven me my entire life, and you've read that it actually helped me survive some pretty deep, dark years. I was suicidal for several decades. And had I not had that longing to contribute in some, profound way, I probably wouldn't still be here. We wouldn't be having this conversation. And it has also driven me to the point of exhaustion and adrenal burnout and, other forms of less than desirable health. So there is a balance, at which, the desire to be purposeful is a true north. It's a direction, it's a focus and a compass for us. And then there is this balancing point in which we get to just experience fun and be human and frail and fragile and have warts and
snarf a beer,
snarf a beer. And so I would ask you, how do you define naughty? I guess naughty feels playful to me. And
of course,
certainly we need tons of play in our lives. For God's sake, if you can't live a purposeful and playful life, what is the point?
Of course, that's why I use the word naughty expressly. When I was running Redken, I remember the brief I wanted to give to my team for a new campaign. And I said, I want a little bit of edge. What do you mean by edge? Well, just a little naughtiness in it. I didn't want this sort of perfectly clean, retouched girl with perfect hair. I wanted her to very much feel like she'd just woken up after having sex.
Yeah.
So it's a very adult thought. I'm not going bad on it or perverted, but I wanted that to be expressed. And naughty in a corporate world is a reasonable term. It's not too far afield. But beyond naughty are many things. And, it could be a naughty thing for one person, which could be a scandalous thing for another person. And then beyond that, there's far further ideas. But naughty I like to use the word naughty because it sort of, it leads us into that other discussion. One of the other things that I think about with regard to this notion of purpose, I frequently think about progress and the need for self-awareness. And I've done a lot of surveys, and one of my favorite questions to ask, which has been asked now by thousands of people, answered by thousands of people, is how empathic do you think of yourself? And I expressly have the answers positioned as average, below average, or above average. And there are 5 different modules. Well, 77% of people think that they're above average. Mm-hmm. And so this points to this notion of self-awareness. And I think that it feels like that issue, the overwhelming ego, the sense of like, I went to school, I'm intelligent, I know myself. This is the big thing, is that the inability to be truly self-aware. And that part of getting to purpose through being more self-aware, aware of your shadows, aware of who you are.
And that's the challenge, especially in our culture, where our culture is not set up for us to become more aware of ourselves. We're conditioned to want to be a part of the normative expression of humanity. And that normative expression currently, or at least prior to this current crisis, is for us to pretend a lot that we are something that is, more perfect than we currently are. And I think our current experience right now in this moment of extreme crisis and vulnerability is to accept that vulnerable is good. Vulnerable allows us to heal. It allows us to learn to cope newly. It allows us to express something about ourselves that we wouldn't formerly have expressed. And in doing that, we become more available to the truth of ourselves and more purposeful than. I think I also want to suggest that the ego will always have a role in, living on purpose. It is our foundational anchor as humans. It keeps us in the material world. It keeps us functional. It allows
ambition.
Us to fit in, have ambition, and be productive and create products and services. And we have to have an egoic drive. So ego is not bad. I don't ever suggest that there's not plenty of room for our ego. It's just when our ego dominates our lives and our world as it currently has, that we lose touch with what it is we're really here to contribute. And so there is a point in human development when we become less attached to the egoic desires and more attached, more open to the desires of spirit. And this is a point at which in humanity we are crossing that threshold. Our center of gravity is shifting in the moment, like right now, real time. We are evolving to a place where more and more people are saying, oh, there is something more important than me. I am actually willing to subject myself to the broader desires, the broader needs of humanity, of the planet Earth, of the sentient beings, the animals and trees and such, that I actually need to focus on that as much or more than I focus on my own needs. And we're there. We've moved the needle right now. And I am excited for the future of humanity on this planet, that we might actually turn this around if we pay attention, if we take heed to this moment in time and embrace it and say, yeah, that was a good thing to experience.
There's something, there are several thoughts, but at one point I'm thinking that during this COVID pandemic, there has been a lot of selfishness as well. And people worried about me, my skin, my life, my family, hoarding, and so on. So there's been a retrenchment on the self. At the same time, there's now this other idea that we're a small little pimple on an enormous animal, and I'm insignificant to it. Within purpose, and certainly in a corporate world, I really focus on the idea of purpose beyond your immediate community, which typically includes shareholders and customers and employees. So going beyond yourself, if you will. So in a corporate environment, the self, therefore, is a larger entity, of course. And I love the fact that you call yourself a purpose activator, because actually I tend to talk about myself as a brand activator. And I think that the two shall meet in that that's really a great brand, is one that does have purpose. So the question I have for you in the work that you do, because you don't just work with individuals on their purpose, you do work with corporations. To what extent do you believe that the purpose of a company must be attached to the purpose of the person?
It's a great question. And it's one that I've evolved in. I tend to believe that most companies are born of an idea presented to the world by a person or a small group of people. And there was something in that person that felt there was a need for this particular product. And, you could call that some version of purpose. It's often not so close to purpose, but there's something born in it. And so my original idea of purpose in a company really was about getting close to that seed of inspiration, and then using that inspiration and infusing it in every system, in every product, in every system in the company. What I also have come to see is that, companies evolve just like people. And good companies that are run well and are more coherent, I guess, would be a way to describe it, is they take on a life of their own, which represents more than just the founder's desires. It could represent a team of executives or managers or leaders. It could represent the shareholders. It could represent the customers. And so purpose in a company can also evolve and be more representative of the whole, of the intent of the company. So yes, I think that purpose does look different depending on how the company was originated, how it's evolved. I will also suggest that I don't call it purpose when a company says we're going to create a beneficial product that serves the planet and will do good, and a compostable something or other, or we're going to contribute to a charity. Those are great things, and I'm glad that more and more companies are inspired to do those kinds of things. I don't call those purpose-driven products. They're not founded necessarily in the deep essence of a founder or a collection of individuals. Purpose is something that's internally derived and externally expressed. And when you do good things in the world, that's wonderful, and it will have an impact, but it's not necessarily expressing that deep desire, the innate expression of a soul or a group of souls who are coherent, that is going to have a more profound impact in the world because it comes from a much deeper place.
So I hear you, and this notion of the founder's story, going back to it, sure, but it was just to invent a thing, a widget that did something, and that was the purpose of the company, soulless. Otherwise, yes, but it was really useful because that widget helped his grandmother, live longer or whatever, the door open, whatever. Then if you can relate that back to some sort of more textual element personally. The overriding conclusion I kind of get is that you can't possibly have a big company with purpose in your definition. That's to say 10,000 people that all dig in on their deep introspective notion and relate that back to the founder issue. It feels very fabricated, if not implausible, to have an enormous scale of people relate at that level into the purpose.
Well, I would disagree with that.
Good.
And so I'm not suggesting that every person in the company has the same purpose as if we were to use the story of the founder's purpose, that every person in the company has the same purpose. I do believe big companies have purpose. And as I said, it might either be the founder's original purpose, or it might be a new coherent purpose that's created by this group of people who together have created a new, purpose and vision for the company. I do believe, however, that companies are optimized when each person in the company, whatever their role, they bring themselves, their purposeful selves, to the company, and they contribute their gift in a way that's most useful. So every person in the company, if they knew their purpose, could say, oh, here's how my contribution fits. Oh, it doesn't actually really fit in this role. Maybe I'm in the wrong role. Maybe I'm in the wrong company. And so each of us can decide individually that I'm bringing myself fully because these are the things I do. As you know, I believe each of us has this nuanced purpose that's not about project or job or career or, initiative. It's some facet of me that I do. When I speak powerful truths, I can do that anywhere. I can be in any context, in any relationship, in any place on the planet. That's a facet of my purpose, and that's what I do. And I also shine love onto shadow. Believe me, I do that everywhere. So that is not a job.
Right. So for you, the key is, first of all, your purpose. Second of all,
Right.
you connect it to what you're doing. And I think that's I think the learning that I'm taking away. I wanted to ask one last question, Holly, to cover another area that also I just loved, it really stimulated me while reading your book, which is oftentimes one says, well, find your purpose. It's hard. Or the other one is, and it's similar, well, just follow your passion. Well, fuck if I know what my passion is. I was wondering how you connect the two P's, passion and purpose. What's the narrative or connection that runs around in Holly's mind?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking that. This is Holly's cosmology. That's right.
Interstellar.
So I believe that purpose is our soul's task. Our soul comes in with an orientation, and I believe we carry this orientation throughout our many lifetimes and dimensions, but that's my belief. And this is what, this being that is now housed in the body and expression of Holly, this is what my soul wants me to do, and these are the many facets of it. So purpose is a fairly defined orientation, if you will, and it looks like a thread in a lifetime. Passion, from my perspective, is the inspiration I experience when I am living some part of my purpose. So you probably know I'm a pretty passionate person because I live fully. I am living fully my purpose. And I haven't always. So I haven't always had that passion. I haven't always been impassioned. But when I am experiencing a part of me that's like, oh, that feels like me, that feels true, I'm loving that, I'm digging this thing I'm doing, that is passion. It's an expression of purpose. So So listening to your passions is one way to find your way to purpose. So what is it that gives you great joy or delight, or you get excited about, or you scream, with joy, with excitement when somebody says, let's go do that? Those are expressions of passion that indicate, I'm getting close to something that's my purpose. So yeah, follow that thread too. Follow the energy, follow the passion, follow the joy, follow the excitement, the curiosity. There are many ways to find our way to purpose if we're paying attention. And usually we experience those in our body. Our soma is an incredible indicator of whether we're on track or not, as is our energy if you have access to your subtle energies. So
that sounds very cosmic, but it's very real. If you can just tap into the things you're feeling when you're doing something, and rather than sort of abjugate it like some sort of other thing or anecdotal, and really understand it for what it is, then you can maybe juice it up. And to your point, I feel passionate about doing what I'm doing. So when I get up at 5 o'clock, it's not oh God, it's 5 o'clock. It's, oh yippee, it's 5 o'clock. And back to the word soma, I prefer actually not to sleep in order to be able to follow my passion, which is not a good thing. But, no one's perfect, Ollie? Ollie? So,
yeah.
Naughty
is good. I mean, in fact, I love that word because it does imply some mischievousness, right? Mm-hmm. And when we're mischievous, we're usually following some thread that somebody sometimes said, oh, you shouldn't do that. And it's like, but no, that's one of my deepest desires. I love that. And I want to keep doing that because it's fun and it's inspiring and it brings me to life. I'm animated when I'm mischievous and, naughty. So I don't actually think naughty is anything to do with shadows.
Interesting. Well, in the realm of naughtiness at work, it was always at one point very challenging for me to explain that I had seen the Grateful Dead a couple of hundred times. Well, who are they? Well, there are some really, really bad acid punk band. No, not exactly. The acid's interesting, but punk, no. And then you explain, and then in French there's the word I assume, j'assume. I take responsibility accountability for this. And I think that's also what my journey has been allowing me. But I also think I've accumulated enough excavation to tap into and accept that part of me and fully embrace that naughtiness. And that's okay. There are other pieces I know I can still do better on. And so, hey, that'll be my journey. Holly, how can someone get in touch, read your magnificent book, connect with you? What's the preferred way?
So website is hollywoodscoaching.com. There's all kinds of resources on the website, and if you're interested in learning more about how to work with me, there's a place where you can fill out an application. The book, The Golden Thread: Where to Find Purpose in the Stages of Your Life, is at our favorite online book retailers, both Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and I believe the Walmart network. And soon to be at bookstores following the pandemic.
Indeed. As we all will be, hopefully, at bookstores again. Holly, thank you for coming on the show. That was a lovely chat. I very much enjoyed your energy and your purpose, and look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having listened to this recording of the Minter Dialogue Show. You'll find the show notes and other blog posts on minterdial.com. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to iTunes to give a rating and review. And to finish, here's a song I wrote with Stephanie Singer, A Convinced Man.
Anticipating the thrill of your intellect. Maybe I tell woman. I'm a convinced man, challenge my fate. I'm a convinced man, competition's innate. A convinced man in the arms of a woman. Despise revenges and struggle to see. Live for the challenge so life's not incomplete. What's wrong with challenge? I know soon we all die. I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust in my reason, and let me show you why.